The hallway outside the emergency room felt more like an afterthought than part of a hospital. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a greenish tint on scuffed linoleum. The monitor in room 3 kept up a soft, regular beep that followed anyone who walked past like a tired heartbeat that refused to quit. Grace Miller pushed her shoulder against the heavy fire door and stepped out of the trauma bay. The smell of antiseptic clung to her scrubs. Dryness burned behind her eyes. She rolled one shoulder, then the other, trying to ease the ache that now felt permanent. She carried an empty white mug in one hand, fingers hooked through the handle. The mug was chipped on one side, the words "Be kind" faded where her thumb usually rested. The coffee had been gone for hours. She still held onto the mug as if it weighed less than an empty hand. At the end of the corridor, an old man in a frayed jacket slept halfway off a plastic chair. His socked foot dangled toes almost touching the floor. His thin blanket had slipped down to his knees. Grace stopped, set the mug on the nearest chair, and gently tugged the blanket back up around his shoulders. He stirred, lips twitching, then settled again. She checked his chart on the armrest. No family listed, no emergency contact, no one coming. She picked up her mug and kept moving. A bald piece of bloody gauze lay near the crash cart, just outside the red line that marked the resuscitation area. Someone from the last code had dropped it and never looked back. Grace Bent scooped it into her gloved hand and walked it to the biohazard bin. The lid thumped softly as it closed. "Morning, Miller." The voice came from the security desk near the ambulance bay. Ray Ortiz leaned back in his chair, one boot propped against the wall, jacket half-zipped. His eyes were tired but awake, the kind that missed almost nothing. "Morning is generous," Grace replied. Her voice was hoarse from too many hours of talking over alarms and sirens. Ray glanced at the clock, then at her. "You know you are the only one who cleans up after a 12-car pileup, right?" She shrugged, the corner of her mouth lifting a little. "Someone has to." He watched her a second longer, then nodded as if filing something away. She moved past, pushed through the swinging doors into the main ER. Inside, the room felt smaller than it had at midnight. One of the residents snored on a rolling stool near the medication station. Another nurse finished charting, eyes half-closed, hand moving on autopilot. The air was thick with old adrenaline and the fading echo of panic. From the glassed-in doctor's lounge, laughter spilled out too bright for the hour. The TV above their heads played a news segment about a conflict overseas. On mute, helicopters crossed a desert sky, rotors chopping invisible air. Grace turned her head, caught the flicker of rotors, then looked away. Her right hand brushed her left wrist where a pale, narrow scar ran beneath the sleeve of her scrub top. Her fingers hesitated there for half a second, then she smoothed the fabric and kept walking. The double doors to the ambulance bay flew open with a clatter. A paramedic backed in with a gurney, talking fast. Male, late 20s, construction worker, scaffolding collapse, hypotensive, tacky, no ID, no wallet, no one on scene who knew him. Vitals tanked on the way. A resident in a wrinkled coat glanced over, frowning. No ID, no insurance on file. The paramedic shook his head. "Nothing, he was under concrete and rebar. We dug fast, not clean." Another doctor slid his phone into his pocket and stepped closer, scanning the patient with a detached eye. "This is going to be complex. Trauma, maybe internal bleed, maybe spinal. If we pour all our resources into him and he arrests twice, our numbers get hammered." The word numbers hung in the air. The construction worker lay motionless on the gurney. Dust streaked his hair. A smear of dried concrete crusted along his jaw. His chest rose shallow and uneven under a shredded high-visibility vest. Grace was already there, hands on the rails, eyes on his face. "Room 2 is open," she said. "We can move him now." The resident hesitated. "We should at least wait for Dr. Klein. He will want to decide if this is stabilize and transfer." "There is nothing to stabilize if we wait," Grace answered quietly. The room buzzed with small sounds. A printer somewhere spat out pages. The TV continued to flash images of distant explosions with no sound. A blood pressure cuff inflated with its dull whir. Grace did not raise her voice. She tilted the gurney just enough, pushed with her hip, and the paramedic caught on. Together, they rolled the patient toward room 2. In the small trauma bay, the fluorescent lights seemed harsher. Grace snapped on fresh gloves. 2 large-bore IVs, she told the nearest intern. "Fluids wide open, oxygen, non-rebreather. Get me a set of baseline labs and a chest x-ray order stat." The intern looked toward the doorway as if waiting for someone else to confirm. "Are we cleared for all that?" he asked. Grace did not bother looking up. "He's bleeding somewhere and his pressure is disappearing. You can wait for a signature or you can help." The intern swallowed, then stepped to the cart, fingers clumsy on the IV kit. Grace steadied his hand for a moment with a touch, then turned back to the patient. She pressed her stethoscope to the man's chest, listening past the noise in the room. Footsteps approached. Dr. Aaron Klein appeared in the doorway, tying his mask with slow, controlled motions. His hair was perfect even at this hour. His nameplate glinted against his white coat. "Someone paged me about a walking liability," he said. His gaze flicked over the monitor, the gurney, the dust on the patient's skin. No ID, no payer, high risk, low reward. Grace did not straighten. She kept one hand on the man's shoulder, feeling the shallow rise of each breath. "He fell with a scaffold," she said. "He's not a liability. He is a patient." Klein checked the vitals, then the time. "We can stabilize and transfer him to county. Let them absorb the risk. Our trauma numbers are already stretched." Grace met his eyes for a brief second. Hers were ringed with exhaustion but steady. "By the time we finish the paperwork and the transfer, he will be dead," she said. "I have IV access. We can start now." Klein's jaw tightened. "You have a hero complex, Miller. That is not part of your job description." Her hand never left the patient's shoulder. "Seeing a person is," she answered. The monitor let out a sharp beeping run, irregular. Blood pressure dipped another line. The construction worker's fingers twitched, then went limp. Klein clicked his pen, then sighed. "Fine. Short-term stabilization. If he crashes twice, we call it and we ship." Grace did not respond. She already had the second IV in the line taped, the bag hanging. Clear fluid began to drip. She tilted the patient's head, adjusted the mask, watched his chest rise again a little deeper this time. The fight lasted close to 40 minutes. Nurses swapped out paramedics, drifted away when their part was done. Residents checked in and out. Grace stayed in the center of it, moving from one side of the bed to the other, calling for meds, catching mistakes before they landed. Sweat gathered at the back of her neck. Her arms ached from compressions. Her throat burned when she called out values. At the end of it, the number steadied. Blood pressure crawled back into a survivable range. The patient's color shifted from ashy gray to something closer to human. "ICU will take him," someone said in the doorway. The gurney rolled out. The room emptied. No one clapped. No one said her name. Grace peeled off her gloves. Her hands trembled for a second, then went still. She picked up her chipped mug from the counter where she had left it, though it was still empty, and walked out of the trauma bay. On her way to the locker room, she passed the Hall of Excellence. Framed photos lined the wall from ceiling to floor, surgeons with perfect smiles, philanthropists in suits, administrators with practiced expressions. Not a single nurse in any frame. Grace slowed, taking in the wall with a quick, practiced glance. She did not stop. She pushed through another set of doors into the staff area. Inside the small locker room, the air smelled of detergent and old coffee. She spun the dial on her locker, opened it, and set the Be Kind mug on the shelf. Beneath a folded set of spare scrubs, she pulled out a worn plastic card. The edges were frayed, the print faded. "Global Relief Corps," it read. A logo of 2 intersecting circles so faded it was almost just a smudge. Her photo on the card was younger, hair tied back, tighter eyes, sharper. She held the card between her fingers for a few seconds. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the building, a monitor beeped 3 times in a row, then settled. Grace slipped the card back under the scrubs and closed the locker door. The metal clicked shut. She took her coat from the hook, shrugged into it, and picked up her empty mug again before stepping out into the hallway. Outside, dawn had not quite arrived. The windows at the end of the corridor showed only a faint hint of the sky starting to pale. She walked toward the exit shoes, whispering against the floor, the chipped white mug hanging from her hand. By the time Grace stepped out into the staff parking lot, the sky over Harborview was turning the color of worn steel. The air held a damp chill that crept through her coat. Her breath showed in thin white puffs as she crossed the cracked asphalt, empty mug swinging from her fingers. A delivery truck rumbled past on the access road, headlights washing over faded parking lines, and a crooked sign that read "Staff Only." For a second, the glare lit up the dark shape of the hospital behind her. Then it was gone, and the building became a hulking shadow again. She unlocked her old sedan, slid in, and set the Be Kind mug in the cup holder. Her hands rested on the wheel a moment longer than necessary. Then she started the engine and drove out of the lot, taillights dissolving into the blue-gray morning. By mid-afternoon, the night shift felt like something that had happened to someone else. Harborview Mercy had changed skins. The waiting room was crowded again, the vending machines were humming, and the overhead speakers called codes and consults with brisk indifference. In the break room, a television played local news over the hiss of the coffee maker. A reporter stood in front of a chain-link fence, wind shoving at her hair, while military vehicles rolled past behind her. The sound was low, just enough to catch a few words. "John going operations overseas." Nobody in scrubs looked up. What caught attention was not the world outside, but the rumor that started moving through the halls like a draft. First, it was a whisper at the nurse's station, then a half laugh in the elevator, then a quiet line dropped in the medication room. "Security says there were some big guys here last night." "Like big how?" "Like boots, short hair, no smiles," asking for Grace. In the charge nurse office, someone added a detail. "Ortiz said they had that look. You know, not cops, the other kind." What would they want with her? Maybe she has a past. The last words were delivered with a smirk that tried to hide curiosity and unease in equal parts. Dr. Marcus Hale heard the tail end of it as he passed. He paused outside the doorway just long enough to catch Grace's name and the phrase military security. A frown tightened the lines around his mouth. He continued down the hall. An hour later, he sent for her. His office had no windows to the outside, only a narrow vertical pane that looked down into the main atrium. From there, you could see the streaming movement of staff and visitors reduced to shapes behind glass. A screensaver with shifting blue lines glowed on his computer monitor. A framed certificate hung perfectly straight above a file cabinet. Grace stood in front of his desk, coat off hair, tied-back badge clipped to the V of her scrub top. A faint ring from her empty mug marked her hand, a pale circle where porcelain had rested. "You asked for me," she said. Hale looked at her for a moment without speaking, weighing something no chart could quantify. "Yes." He folded his hands. "There were some visitors overnight. Large men, no appointment. They were asking for you by name." He let the information sit between them. Grace's face did not change much, just the smallest tightening around her eyes. "I did not see anyone," she said. "Security tells me they looked like military," Hale went on. "Not local, not casual. That concerns me." Her gaze shifted briefly toward the narrow glass pane to the movement of people below. "I do not know who they were," she replied. "You understand why I'm asking," Hale said. "This hospital cannot be tangled in anything off the books. If you are connected to something that might blow back on us, I need to know." Grace held his eyes. There was fatigue there and something older. "I come here," she said. "I work my shift. I go home. That is all." Her tone never rose. There was no defense in it, only simple recitation. Haley let out a slow breath, not quite satisfied, not quite ready to push harder. After a moment, he picked up a folder signaling the end of the conversation. "You can go," he said. "Keep your phone on. We are short tonight." She nodded, turned, and left the office. Through the glass, Hale watched her walk away down the corridor, her figure swallowed up by the stream of blue and white scrubs. The evening gathered itself around the hospital. Outside, the sky darkened from gray to charcoal. Rain tapped a restless pattern against the high windows. Inside, the fluorescent light flattened everyone's faces into the same shade of tired. The code alarm sounded for a new arrival, shrill and clipped. "Code inbound Bay 1, possible anaphylaxis, ETA 3 minutes. Grace was already moving when the words hit the speakers. She tied her hair a little tighter, checked that her stethoscope was around her neck, and slipped into the current of motion toward the ambulance bay. The doors burst open as the gurney came in. A middle-aged man lay strapped down, skin-flushed and angry red lips, swollen throat, working for air that would not come. His tie was loosened but still knotted around his neck suit jacket, pushed back from trembling hands. "He coded 3 times in the rig, the paramedic reported, pushing hard. "We got him back each time. Unknown allergen. He was at some private dinner, collapsed between courses." "Blood pressure?" someone asked. Crashing again. They swung the gurney into Rhesus 1. Monitor sprang to life with jagged lines and numbers that kept sliding down. The oxygen mask fogged with shallow, desperate breaths. Dr. Klein swept into the room, snapping on gloves. Sweat already shone along his hairline. "Looks like straightforward anaphylaxis," he said. "Get Ippy ready, push fluids, airway on standby." Grace took her position at the side of the bed, fingers at the man's neck, searching for the pulse. Her eyes moved over him, cataloging details. The suit was expensive. The watch on his wrist even more so, a gold ring pressed into swollen skin. None of that mattered. What made her stop was a dot, very small, barely there. On the right side of his neck, just over the carotid, a pinpoint mark broke the reddened skin. It sat alone, too precise to be a scratch too out of place to belong to the rest. Around it, the flesh was different, not just allergic, something sharper, more contained. She had seen that kind of mark before, in a tent that flapped madly in desert wind, under light that flickered from a generator that never quite worked, on a man whose eyes had already rolled back. A quiet internal alarm went off in her mind. "Klein," she said, keeping her voice even, "this is not standard anaphylaxis." He did not look up. "Get me the epinephrine 1 milligram. We are losing his pressure." Grace watched the monitor. The numbers sank another notch. Heart rate climbed, then stumbled. "If this is what I think it is," she said, "epinephrine will make it worse. We need a specific reversal agent, non-standard. Pharmacy may have it in the restricted stock." He spun toward her, eyes flaring. "You are a nurse," he snapped. "You chart, you hang fluids. You do not rewrite emergency protocol. Step back." Around them, the room tightened. Residents froze with syringes half filled. The respiratory therapist shifted from one foot to the other. No one wanted to stand in the line between them. Grace flinched under the volume, but her feet stayed planted. Her gaze flicked back to the tiny mark at the man's neck, then to the falling line on the screen. "This compound reacts with IPI," she said. "His heart will not tolerate that combination in his state. We need to reverse the reaction, not double it." "Out," Klein said. "Now." Hale was in the doorway, drawn by the code. He had not meant to step in. He preferred to observe to let his specialists work. Yet something in Grace's tone pulled at him. He watched the way her hand tightened on the rail, watched the way her eyes never left the monitor. The man's heart rate skipped. The warning tone changed pitch. Flatline lurked just ahead, waiting. Grace took one step back from the bed as if making the concession Klein demanded. She moved just enough to be technically out of the way, then spoke again softer. "If you give him IPI in the next 20 seconds, he will arrest, and you will not get him back," she said. "The compound in his system is military grade. It needs a specific antagonist, dosage weight-based narrow window." Klein let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A military compound," he repeated. "Where would you even hear about something like that? Podcasts." Grace turned her head enough to meet his eyes. The noise of the room seemed to recede for a moment, leaving only the beep of the monitor and the wet rasp of the patient's breathing. "I know it," she said, "because I have seen it used in Kandahar." The name dropped into the room like something heavy. The respiratory therapist blinked. One of the residents glanced sharply at her, then at Hale. Hale stepped forward. "What compound are we talking about exactly?" he asked. Grace did not look away. "A neuro-enhanced paralytic used off-label, black box testing. Someone gave it to him probably in a controlled microdose. It interacts badly with standard allergy meds." Silence flashed between two beats of the monitor. "Do you have evidence, or are we guessing at war stories?" Klein demanded. Her fingers curled into her palm nails, biting skin. "Check the mark on his neck," she said. "Look at the pattern, not just the color." Hale moved first. He stepped to the bedside, leaned in, and saw the pinpoint puncture, the strange ring of discoloration around it. Something old and unwelcome stirred in the back of his mind, a briefing he had half listened to years ago. He straightened. "Get pharmacy on the line," he said to the nearest nurse. "Ask for the restricted reversal agent on the Kappa list, Section 3. Use her description." Klein stared at him. "Marcus, this is not the time to gamble on some fantasy." "It is not a fantasy," Hale replied, voice flat. "Call pharmacy." Reluctance rippled through the room, then gave way. A phone was snatched up. Commands moved in low, urgent tones. When the drug arrived, the label did not use the name Grace had in her head. It never did. Everything about it was coded, tucked behind clinical terms that told nothing. She read the dosage, made a quick calculation in her head, then passed the vial to the resident with the syringe. "Slow push," she said. "Watch his rhythm, 20 seconds, and you will know." No one argued this time. The medication slid into the IV line. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the man's breathing changed. The tight high wheeze softened. His chest eased fraction by fraction. The angry red of his skin receded, leaving blotches instead of an unbroken flush. The monitor chimed a different pattern. Heart rate steadied. Blood pressure crawled upward. A shared breath left the room. The respiratory therapist loosened his grip on the intubation tray. The paramedic who had ridden in with the patient sagged back against the wall, eyes closing briefly. Klein looked at Grace, words forming and dying before they reached his mouth. Hale held her gaze as well. There was no accusation there now, only calculation and a slow-forming question. Around the nurse's station later, the story began to move. She called a restricted drug by class. She knew about some test compound from a war zone. She said Kandahar like she had been there. There was an edge to the whisper now, not just amusement. Something like wariness. Something like awe, masked quickly with skepticism. "Probably a failed soldier," one doctor said in the lounge, stirring his coffee. "If she was any good, she would still be in uniform. Look at her. She's barely 5'6". Laughter followed, thin and uneasy. Far below in the staff parking lot, rain had turned to a fine mist. Later that evening, when Grace finally stepped outside again, the lot looked almost empty. A single figure stood near the far corner where the light from the pole barely reached. He was broad-shouldered under a black hoodie, hands in his pockets, still as a statue. As she walked toward her car, his head lifted. Grace slowed, the hair along her arms prickling. Her keys were in her hand, metal teeth pressing into her palm. When she drew close enough to see his face, he spoke. His voice was low, careful, shaped like someone used to talking in the dark. "Ma'am," he said, "we have been looking for you." Before she could answer, he tipped his head once, in a motion that was not quite a bow, then turned. A dark SUV that had been idling near the edge of the lot rolled forward. He got in. The vehicle pulled away, taillights swallowed by the wet night. Grace stood where she was for a long moment, rain settling on her hair, her coat the chipped white mug in her hand. Then she walked to her car, opened the door, and sat down without starting the engine. Later in her small apartment, she opened the bottom drawer of her dresser and lifted out a folded t-shirt. Beneath it lay a cloth patch, edges frayed, colors dulled. A blackbird wing, spread claws gripping a slim knife. Raven, and the stitching red nearly worn away. She held it in her palm thumb, tracing the outline of the feathered wings. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant rush of traffic on wet streets. For a moment she closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she set the patch back in its hiding place, closed the drawer, and turned off the light. The night she dreamed of rotors again, Grace woke with her heart hammering against her ribs. For a moment she did not know which ceiling she was staring at. Canvas or plaster, desert or harbor view. The darkness in her bedroom was soft and familiar, not the hard absence of light from a blackout tent. There was a street lamp outside the window, a thin glow leaking around the edges of the curtains. She lay still listening. No engines, no shouted orders, only the low hiss of her radiator and the occasional tire on wet pavement far below. Her hand had curled into a fist in her sleep. When she unclenched it, she found she was gripping the hem of her t-shirt, not the edge of a stretcher. It was just after 9 in the evening when she stepped out of the staff entrance at Harborview Mercy the next day. The air had cooled the rain, paused, leaving the parking lot slick and shiny like a sheet of black glass. Sodium lights painted everything in a dull yellow wash. Her shift had run long. There had been a pile-up on the freeway, a cluster of minor injuries, and one elderly woman who held her hand and talked about a cat that had died years ago. The hospital was quieter now. The last of the visitors gone, the emergency room settled into the strange humming stillness that came between waves of chaos. Grace tightened her coat around her mug and one handbag over her shoulder. The patch in her dresser had stayed where she left it. She had not looked at it again before coming in. She took 3 steps into the lot. The night exploded into wind. A deep pulsing thump rolled over the hospital, low and rhythmic. The first gust hit her hard enough that she had to plant her feet. Dust and leaves and a discarded plastic cup skittered across the asphalt. The sodium lights on the poles shuddered in their casings. Then she heard it clearly. Rotor blades. The sound grew heavier, beating the air into submission. A dark shape dropped out of the sky over the far end of the lot, navigation lights winking red and green. As it descended, the wash from the blades flattened grass, whipped at coats, sent papers flying from an open trash can. The helicopter was not a news chopper. It was too wide, too purposeful, too marked by angles that belonged to the military and nowhere else. Grace stood at the edge of the painted staff spaces, coat flapping hair pulled loose from its tie. The mug handle dug into her fingers. She did not move. Behind her, the staff entrance door banged open. Ray Ortiz squinted into the storm of grit and light. "What the hell?" he shouted, hand over his eyes. His radio crackled wild static at his shoulder. "We did not get anything about this, I swear." Nurses and techs appeared in the doorway behind him, drawn as if by a magnet. Someone in business attire pressed a handkerchief to their face to block the dust. A resident lifted a phone already recording. The helicopter settled into the center of the lot skids, touching down with a jolt that sent another wave of air through the parked cars. An alarm chirped as the sedan's security system misread the vibrations as intrusion. Floodlights along the underside of the aircraft clicked on cutting sharp white cones through the night. They bathed the hospital wall, the cracked asphalt, and the cluster of staff in harsh, unflattering clarity. The side door of the helicopter slid open. 5 figures emerged one after another, dropping lightly to the ground. Their movement was contained, almost quiet in spite of all the noise. They wore dark tactical gear helmets under their arms, weapons holstered, faces partially shadowed by the glare. They formed a line without speaking, boots planted, shoulders squared. Even from a distance, everything about them said habit and repetition and training that lived in bone. The one in the center took a breath, squared himself as if before a superior, and raised his voice over the rotors. "Permission to approach, ma'am." At first, no one answered. Most of the staff glanced around thinking the same thing. Who was he talking to? Ray looked from the soldiers to the clump of people at his back, then to Grace. His eyes widened slightly. She had not moved since the helicopter came in. The wind pushed her coat-back hair, whipping across her face. Her expression was almost neutral, but there was a tightness at the corners of her mouth. The man at the center of the line took a few steps forward, moving with deliberation. He did not look at the doctors in their white coats or the administrators in their tailored suits. His eyes found Grace and did not leave her. "Ma'am," he called again, closer now. "Commander James Rudd, United States Navy, requesting permission to approach." He stopped a few feet away, waiting. Grace drew in a slow breath as if adjusting to an old forgotten altitude. She set her mug on the hood of the nearest car and stepped toward him until the rotor wash hit her full. The air stung her eyes. Her coat snapped around her legs. "Commander," she said. Her voice carried more than she expected. Years of barking orders through noise had left their mark. Rudd exhaled something like relief flickering across his face. Up close, he looked younger than his bearing suggested. Lines at the corners of his eyes, a faint scar near his temple, haircut regulation short. He nodded once, then lifted a gloved hand and motioned to one of the men behind him. The operator jogged forward and passed him a small battered metal plate. It looked like it had been pried out of something and kept too long in a pocket that did not forgive sharp edges. Rudd held it out to her with both hands as if it weighed more than its size. "We recovered this from a classified debrief file," he said. "Identifier tag. The serial on it belongs to an asset named in that report." Under the harsh light, the stamped letters and numbers were clear. Raven, 9 Nightingale, Medic Miller, G. The world contracted around the small rectangle of metal in her palm. The helicopter noise, the hospital windows, the cluster of onlookers all shifted to the periphery. Her thumb brushed the cold surface, finding scratches she had not put there. Behind Ray, someone whispered, half shouted to be heard. "What is Raven 9? There was an answer before anyone at Harborview could offer a guess. A doctor in a tan overcoat had come out to see what was happening. His hair was still damp from a late shower, his tie loosened. He stopped at the edge of the group and stared at the plate in Grace's hand. "Raven 9, he said simply. "That is that ghost unit they briefed us on years back. All-female recon and medical team. Kandahar Theater, they went missing. Officially." The word missing landed with a dull thud. Rudd looked at Grace, not the doctor. "Official records state that during an engagement outside Kandahar, you held a compromised checkpoint under fire," he said. The words sounded rehearsed, but his voice betrayed something like awe. "You managed 23 severe trauma wounds with limited supplies. You pulled 18 men out alive when everyone else said stand down. You refused any commendation. Your unit disappeared from active duty after that." On the balcony above the entrance, more staff pressed against the glass faces, pale in the reflection of the floodlights. Dr. Marcus Hale stood at the center of them, one hand braced on the rail, eyes locked on the scene below. Dr. Klein was there too. His usual smirk had drained away. He looked from Grace to the soldiers and back as if trying to fit two incompatible images in his mind. "That cannot be her," he said, but the words had no strength. Grace closed her fingers around the plate, then opened them again. Her eyes had gone very still. "Why are you here, Commander?" she asked. Rudd worked his jaw, searching for the simplest path. "We lost our field commander," he said. "Commander," he said. "We are scheduled to execute a critical extraction operation. High-value intelligence asset, hostile territory. The operation requires someone who can lead in combat and keep people breathing when things go wrong. Our files say you are that person." She watched him. The rotor wash whipped at his gear, tugged at his sleeves, but his stance did not shift. "I am not in your files anymore," she said. "I left a long time ago. I am just a nurse now." Behind her, someone scoffed at the word just, but it died quickly. Rudd shook his head. "With respect, ma'am," he said, "you are Raven 9, and there are men on that manifest who will not make it home without you." One of the operators behind him spoke up, voice rough from dust or cigarettes. "We would not be here if we had another choice," he said. "We have seen what happens when we do not have the right medic, the right lead. We do not want to see it again." Their eyes were exposed above their gear. Under the harsh light, fear and hope were both visible there, crowded together in the small space around their pupils. Grace felt the weight of the metal plate in her hand, felt the thin tug of the hospital at her back, the pull of fluorescent lights and charting stations, and the old man she had tucked in the night before. "You have other medics," she said. "Not like you, Ashbuon. Ich dabish like you," Rudd replied. There was no flattery in it, only a flat statement of fact. Silence stretched between them, filled with the thunder of the blades. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "If I go," she said, "I have a condition." "Name it," Rudd said at once. "No one dies," Grace answered. "Not on my watch, not because we were careless." He swallowed, throat working around the noise. "We cannot control war," he said. "We both know that. But we can promise this. We will give you everything you ask for out there, every resource, every second you call for. We will not throw anyone away." His men nodded. The conviction was raw, almost painful. Grace looked past him at the hospital windows. Faces were pressed there, small and indistinct, watching her. Watching not a nurse now, but something else they had never bothered to imagine. Her fingers tightened around the plate, then loosened. She handed it back. "All right," she said. "Then I go." She turned to Ray, who stood with his radio slack in his hand. "Can you give me 10 minutes?" she asked. He blinked as if waking up. "Take what you need," he said. His voice was oddly formal. Inside, the corridors felt narrower. The fluorescent lights buzzed a little louder. Grace walked straight to the locker room, ignoring the whispers that flared and died behind her as she passed. At her locker, she spun the combination by feel. The door swung open to reveal the spare scrubs, the folded sweatshirt, the Be Kind mug on the shelf. She did not pack much. Her worn backpack was already half ready from years of habit. A stethoscope, a small notebook, a pen clipped to the strap. Before she closed the locker, she reached for the small stack of sticky notes on the upper shelf. She peeled one free and wrote with decisive strokes, the pen scratching lightly on the paper. She placed the note inside, pressed flat against the metal. Then she shut the door. In the hallway outside, Dr. Hale waited. He had come down from the balcony, though he did not remember making the decision to move. "You are really going with signing," he said. Grace adjusted the strap on her backpack. "They came a long way," she replied. He searched her face, finding the same calm he had seen during codes now stretched over something wider. "Whatever you have been, he said, you have saved lives here, that matters." Her mouth curved in a small, tired smile. "It is the same work," she said. "Different walls." He stepped aside. Ray held the door to the back exit open for her. The wind from the rotors pushed into the hallway, now smelling of fuel and cold air. Grace stepped out into it. The tactical team straightened at the sight of her. This time when Rudd stopped in front of her, he did not ask for permission. He simply nodded once. All 5 operators lifted their right hands and laid them flat against their chests. Fingers spread, palms pressing hard over their hearts. It was not the standard salute. It was something older, more specific, an acknowledgement reserved for someone who had once stood between them and the dark. From the entrances and the windows, staff watched as the gesture unfolded. A doctor who had once joked that she was a failed soldier whispered almost to himself, "She is a legend." Grace did not react to the word. She moved toward the helicopter boots, clicking on the asphalt hair whipping against her cheeks. She climbed in without hesitation, taking a seat where she could see the faces around her, not the ground falling away. Rudd followed, pulling the door closed behind them. The engines rose in pitch. The skids lifted. The parking lot fell back, shrinking the cluster of figures outside Harborview Mercy, blurring into one pale shape against the darker wall. Inside the hospital, the locker room stayed empty. In Locker 17, behind a closed metal door, a small square of yellow paper clung to the cool surface, waiting for the next hand that would open it. By morning, the helicopter was gone, and Harborview Mercy looked almost ordinary again. The only visible sign that anything unusual had happened was a ring of dust on the asphalt where the skids had rested, and a faint scorch of rubber where the wind had shoved a cart into a curb. The hospital stood, as it always had, a rectangle of glass and concrete against a low gray sky. Inside, nothing felt ordinary. Conversations that would have been jokes 2 days before now landed wrong. Someone reached for the word nurse with a familiar condescension and stopped halfway, the rest of the sentence collapsing into a cough. Laughter in the lounge sounded thin, as if the walls were listening. At the staff entrance, Ray Ortiz found the chipped white mug still sitting on the hood of a compact sedan, ringed with a thin halo of dried rain. Be Kind stared back at him in faded letters. He picked it up carefully, as if it might break from being handled by the wrong hands, and carried it inside. On the second floor, Dr. Marcus Hale stood in front of the Hall of Excellence and did not move for a long time. The frames glittered in the overhead light glass over portraits where doctors smiled with curated modesty. Bronze plaques listed donors and honorees, each engraved name a small monument to achievement. His own photograph was there, center panel. White coat, neutral tie expression that was meant to say calm authority. Today it looked like a stranger. Reflected in the glass behind the neat rows of professional faces, he saw the ghost of a different image. A woman in green scrubs hair pulled back, standing on cracked asphalt in the downdraft of a military helicopter, while men in tactical gear saluted her with their hands over their hearts. She had walked past this wall every shift and never slowed. Hale reached up, pressed his fingers to the edge of the frame around his own picture, then let them fall to his side. By noon, a message had gone out to every department. Mandatory staff assembly, auditorium, attendance required. It had been years since anyone had bothered to use the word mandatory for a meeting that did not involve regulators or litigation. People drifted in with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. Nurses sat together near the aisles, eyes watchful. Doctors clustered near the back, arms crossed. Techs and aides filled the middle rows, whispering until the house lights dimmed. The stage was bare except for a lectern and a small table with a pitcher of water. Hale stepped up to the microphone without notes. He looked different. No white coat, no perfectly arranged tie. Just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled once at the wrists. The chipped Be Kind mug sat on the table at his elbow, its chipped edge turned toward the audience. For a moment he did not speak. The murmur in the room died on its own. "You all know who I am," he said finally, "so I will save us the introduction." His voice did not carry the usual polished confidence. It sounded rough, pulled from a place that did not get much use. "You also know what happened in the parking lot last night," he went on. Or at least you think you do. I watched it from the balcony. Like many of you, I thought I was seeing something that did not belong to our world. Soldiers, helicopters. A rumor turned into something with steel and weight. He glanced at the mug, then back up. I want to talk about what does belong to our world, and what I have allowed it to become. He took a breath. I have been proud of this hospital, he said, of our survival rates, our cutting-edge procedures, our reputation. I have accepted and encouraged a culture that values those things above everything else. Titles, publications, donor boards. I told myself that if the numbers looked good, then we were doing our job. His gaze tracked across the seated staff, landing on faces one by one. In the process, he said, I dismissed quiet voices. I mistook silence for weakness. I mistook humility for incompetence. I watched some of you be spoken over, waved aside, undermined, and I let it stand because it did not challenge the numbers. In the back, a surgeon shifted, discomfort running through his posture. A nurse near the aisle stared down at her hands. Hale continued, Last night I saw men who have seen real fire in their lives ask a woman from our staff for help as if she were the only thing between them and losing more of their own. Those men had no interest in our donor wall. They did not care about journals or boards or metrics. They cared about what she had done with her hands and what she carried in her head. He did not say Grace's name. He did not need to. It hung in the air anyway. I have spoken to some of you in ways that implied you were replaceable, he said. Errand runners, extra hands. I watched Dr. Klein tell a nurse she was out of her lane when she saw something none of us did. I watched her save a life because she did not back down from what she knew. I owe her an apology I cannot deliver at this moment. What I can do is tell you this. He straightened and his voice gained a hard edge. This will not continue. A flicker of surprise ran through the room. People shifted forward in their seats almost as one. The Hall of Excellence will come down, he said. Every frame, every plaque that suggests worth is measured in public recognition. We will replace it with something else. Not a shrine to individual names, but a record of what this place is supposed to do. He gestured not toward the auditorium ceiling or the abstract idea of mission statements, but toward the clusters of people in the seats. Some of you have been cleaning up spills at 3 a.m, so no one slips, he said. He mabed. Some of you have been holding hands in waiting rooms for people whose doctors did not have time to sit. Some of you have caught mistakes before they became funerals. He let that sink in. There will be a new protocol, he said. It will carry her name because she has earned that much from us. The Grace Protocol. The words settled on the air, tasting strange and new. It has 2 parts, Hale continued. First, in critical moments, expertise is not defined by title. If you see something that matters for the life in front of you, you speak. You will not be punished for that. You will be expected to do that. A murmur rose and fell. Second, he said, every senior physician in this building, myself included, will complete 30 days of cross-training. That means working as aides, as orderlies, as nurses where possible. That means making beds, turning patients, cleaning spills, running to supply closets. You will see what the work looks like from the other side of the order. A low intake of breath answered him, followed by a scatter of protests. That is not an efficient use of our time. We have surgery scheduled. You cannot be serious. Haley let them speak, then raised a hand and I am very serious, he said. We ask our staff to carry a weight we have not personally shouldered in years, if ever. We have forgotten what it takes to make the system function beyond our own roles. The Grace Protocol is not a punishment. It is a correction. He looked tired, but there was no give in his expression. You may not like it, he said, but you will do it because you work here, because people walk through our doors on the worst days of their lives, and they deserve a team that understands itself as more than layers on a chart. The auditorium was quiet now, not comfortable, not accepting, just quiet. Hale stepped back from the microphone. That is all, he said. People filtered out in clumps, voices low. Some were angry, some thoughtful, some restless. The idea of 30 days without the armor of their usual roles rattled more than a few. Word moved quickly that assignments would be posted by morning. The next week looked different in small, strange ways. On Monday, Dr. Klein was listed on the schedule for a 12-hour shift as an extra pair of hands on the medical ward. His name appeared under a heading that had never had a doctor on it before. He stood in the supply room at 6 a.m, holding a stack of absorbent pads, trying to remember which closet stored the lift devices. A nursing assistant, half his size, showed him the way without a trace of sarcasm. Later, he tried to reposition a patient who was close to 300 pounds. He planted his feet, grabbed the sheet, and pulled. Nothing happened. You will blow your back like that, the assistant said, stepping in. Here, Use the draw sheet. Roll, do not lift. She demonstrated, talking him through the angles, the timing, the simple physics of bodies and fabric and leverage. Sweat ran down his neck by the time they were done. His hands trembled a little from the effort. In another wing, Hale stood in a yellow gown, gloved to the elbows, facing a biohazard spill in a hallway. A bag had split on the way to disposal. The puddle on the floor glistened under the fluorescent lights. He bent his knees awkward over the mop he had not handled since residency. The smell of disinfectant filled his nose as he wrung the head out and pushed it toward the mess. A nurse coming off the night shift stopped, stared for a moment, then reached into the cart. "Double glove," she said, passing him a second pair. "It splashes." He accepted the gloves, pulled them on over the first set, and went back to work. The mop left streaks. He had to go over the same spot 3 times before it looked right. He noticed in a way he never had from behind a desk how long it took, how his back complained, how the hallway was blocked until it was finished. On the 3rd day, a senior cardiologist was spotted hustling down the corridor with a stack of linens balanced precariously in his arms and an alarm from room 12 shrilling behind him. He passed the cart to a nurse without being asked, then turned back at her gesture and held a leg for her while she changed a soaked pad under a frail patient. The work did not change the hospital overnight. Lines still formed in triage, machines still broke at the worst times, tempers still snapped in the middle of 18-hour stretches. What did begin to shift quietly was the way people looked at one another. A surgeon who had once snapped his fingers instead of saying a nurse's name now found himself asking, "What do you think?" in the middle of a complicated case. An aide whose suggestions had been brushed aside saw them written into a care plan. In the break room, the Be Kind mug sat on a shelf above the sink, washed and turned upright. No one used it for coffee. It stayed empty, a small chipped reminder of hands that were no longer there, but had rearranged the weight of the place they left behind. The forward operating base sat in a basin of dust and concrete lit by floodlights that bleached color out of everything they touched. Cargo pallets were stacked along the perimeter, shadowed tents, flapped in a wind that smelled of fuel and hot sand, even after sunset. The helicopter from Harborview settled on the pad with a final shudder. When the rotors wound down, the noise of the base flowed back in engines, shouted orders, someone laughing too loudly to cover how tired they were. Grace stepped out behind Commander Rudd Boots, finding the metal rungs and then the packed dirt. The air was warmer here, thinner, carrying the dry taste of a place that did not know rain very well. A young man waited near the edge of the pad, hands locked behind his back shoulders too straight. His uniform fit like it was new enough to still itch. "Eli Torres," Rudd said, jerking his chin toward him as they walked. "Combat medic. Smart. Green." Eli nodded when they stopped beside him. His eyes went quickly from Rudd to Grace, then back again as if he were not sure where to rest them. "Ma'am," he said. The word caught a little. Grace studied him for a moment. There was a faint tremor at the corner of his jaw. His boots were dusty, but not yet scuffed through at the seams. The medical bag at his feet bulged with gear he probably knew better on paper than in practice. "You trained long?" she asked. 6 months, ma'am," he said. "Field medicine course, trauma labs, live tissue drills." "Experience," she said, "is just time. Habit saves you. We build that now." She did not say it unkindly. It sounded like an instruction, not a consolation. They walked to a tent where someone had set up folding tables and a few collapsible chairs. Inside, under a single hanging lamp, Grace spread a plastic sheet on the ground. She emptied Eli's bag piece by piece. Needles, chest seals, gauze airways, decompression needles, small vials of medications with labels that glinted under the light. "This looks impressive when it is zipped," she said. "It looks less impressive when you cannot find what you need while somebody bleeds." She rearranged the contents into sections, grouping items by function rather than how they had been packed. She timed him as he repacked, eyes closed, then made him do it again. Later, she filled a latex glove with water and tied it off. She taped it beneath an old shirt stretched over a chest-sized training dummy. When he knelt beside it, she handed him a scalpel and a length of tubing. "Tension pneumothorax," she said. "Needle is in your kit. Wind is howling. Dust in your eyes. Someone is screaming in your ear. How long until you treat it?" "Protocols say 15 seconds from recognition," he replied. "Protocol does not care about wind," she said. "Hands do. Try." He did. His first attempt was clumsy, the angle wrong. Water leaked instead of hissing. She corrected his grip, adjusted his line of sight, made him do it again. By the 5th attempt, his movements were smoother. By the 10th, his hands moved almost before the thought. "Do not look at the blood," she said quietly once as he focused on his work. "Look at the injury. The blood is noise. The injury is signal." He nodded, sweat beating at his temple, despite the relative cool in the tent. When the briefing for Lazarus Protocol came, it was in a cramped room lined with maps. A red line traced their intended route across terrain that turned from gray to tan to rust as it climbed into the hills. Points of light marked possible hostiles. A photograph of the intelligence asset, blurred for security, sat at the top of the board. Grace sat at the table with the team, not behind a glass wall. She asked only a few questions, all of them about evacuation routes and medical contingencies. "What is the longest we will be on site with no air cane?" she asked. 15 minutes in worst case, Rudd replied. "Plan for 20, she said. "Equipment for 20. The insertion itself was a collage of sound and fragments of light. Night vision turning the world to a palette of grainy green. The thump of boots on packed earth. Dogs barking far off. The crack of a door kicked in the rush of men clearing rooms with disciplined arcs of their rifles. Grace waited makeshift cover position until the all-clear sounded. Then she moved through the building the way she would walk down a row of beds, eyes catching on details others skipped. Blood on a wall told her where someone had been dragged. Scuff marks showed where someone had fought for a handhold. They found the asset in a back room, zip-tied half-conscious with a bruise blooming over his ribs. His breathing was wrong, too shallow, too quick. She knelt beside him, fingers on his chest counting. She had seen that pattern before, not in a house like this, but in a corridor that had been built to echo. "Flail segment," she said. She said. "We need to splint this now, or the flight shakes him apart." They used what they had, a piece of rigid plastic from a broken crate, strips torn from a curtain, duct tape from Eli's bag. They bound the injured ribs as best they could and moved him. On the roof, under the roar of rotors and the snap of straps tightening, Grace turned a corner of the landing zone into a miniature trauma bay. She laid out what she might need within arm's reach. She checked Pupil's airway pulse in a rhythm that felt as familiar as any shift change. On the flight out, the helicopter bucked in rough air. A bullet hit the fuselage somewhere behind her metal, screaming briefly. She did not look up. Her hand stayed on the oxygen mask, on the clamps on the line that kept the asset tethered to more than the stretcher. When the base swallowed them again, lights bright and unforgiving, she stepped off the aircraft last. Her shoulders were sore, her ears rang. The asset was alive. Debriefing happened in a cool room with a stale coffee smell. The maps were the same. The lines on them meant something different this time. General Thompson listened to the report, a finger-steepled face unreadable. When Rudd finished, the room was quiet. "All hands accounted for," I said. "Asset stable in secure care. 0 fatalities." The general turned to Grace. "Your condition was met," he said. "No one died." She sat straight in the metal chair, hands flat on the table. "That was the agreement," she said. "You are an impossible asset to replace," Thompson said. "Name your rank, your unit, your theater. I will sign it. You want stateside training, frontline advisory role, you can have it." Grace looked at him for a long moment. The tent, the maps, the walls, it all seemed to shift in her vision, aligning with halls of another kind of building. Different tiles, different paint colors, the same tired faces. "I'm not here for a career," she said. "I came for a mission. It is complete." "You could save more people with us," he insisted. "There is another front," she replied. "A waiting room where fear sits for 6 hours without a name, a hallway where charts matter more than faces, a place where indifference kills just as quietly as bullets." Rudd watched her as she spoke, understanding dawning slow and sure. "That is where I am needed now," she said. Thompson studied her, then nodded once. It was not agreement, it was recognition. When Grace returned to the States, she did not go back to Harborview. She found a small clinic in a suburb that did not show up on national news. The building had 3 exam rooms, a cramped reception area, and a waiting bench that creaked when someone larger sat down. The paperwork was on paper, not screens. The chairs were mismatched but clean. There was time in this place to sit with a patient while they fumbled for the right words. She hung her stethoscope on a hook, set her backpack in the corner, and taped a simple schedule to the wall. On the back of the exam room door, where only she would see it when she closed it, she pinned the Raven 9 patch. The black bird looked smaller here, out of place among posters about flu shots and blood pressure. For a while, days passed measured in blood pressure readings, sore throats, and long stories told by people who had not been listened to in years. The quiet work of keeping lives from tipping over into crisis. Then, the ground moved. It started with a low groan like a heavy truck rolling too close to the building. Grace felt it in the soles of her feet first, then in the way the exam table shivered. A framed chart of the respiratory system rattled against the wall. The tremor deepened, the room swayed. A metal tray slid a few inches, instruments chiming. In the distance, car alarms began to wail. "Earthquake," Grace said to the patient on the table and to herself. "Stay under the frame." She guided the woman down and under the table, bracing one hand against the wall, the other on the metal leg. The shaking lasted longer than she wanted it to. Long enough for her to picture glass breaking roads, cracking buildings older than this one sagging. When it stopped, the sudden stillness felt wrong. Sirens layered over one another outside, distant then closer. Police, fire, ambulances. Harborview Mercy felt the wave in its foundations. Ceiling tiles jumped. A light fixture swung in lazy circles after it was done. In the emergency department, monitors flickered, then steadied. For a few seconds, everyone held their breath. Then the call started. Bridge collapse, structure fires, a school with a partial roof failure. The radio filled faster than anyone could write. Dr. Hale stood in the center of the chaos, the lines of his face sharper than usual. "Triage stations at the loading dock and the main entrance," he said. "Red, yellow, green, no exceptions for names. Faces first, charts later." Staff moved. Nurses grabbed crash carts and color tags. Orderlies pulled stretchers into rough rows. A donor whose name was on 3 plaques staggered in holding his arm, and a nurse with 2 years on the job told him gently but firmly to sit in yellow while she ran past to a child whose lips were turning blue. In the city, Eli Torres rode in the back of a transport truck with his bag between his knees. The Lazarus team had been en route back to base when the quake hit. They barely had time to shrug out of their gear before being told they were going to a school. The building had lost one wall. Classrooms yawned open to the outside like cut boxes. Dust hung in the air, tasting of chalk and plaster and something metallic. Eli jumped down from the truck into a churn of movement. Parents screaming names, firefighters hauling hoses, volunteers forming lines to pass rubble hand to hand. Someone shouted that there was breathing under a collapsed section of hallway. Eli grabbed his bag and ran toward the sound. He ducked under a slab that propped up another, crawling into a space that smelled of dust and fear. His headlamp cut a narrow path through the gray. The boy was wedged under a fallen beam torso, twisted. His eyes were wide whites. "Hey," Eli said, dropping to his knees beside him. "I am Eli. I am a medic. I have you." The boy tried to answer. The sound that came out was wet and thin. His chest rose oddly, one side expanding, the other barely moving. There was a hollow sucking rattle with each breath. Eli put a hand flat on the boy's chest. Under his palm, he felt the shift and pull of air collecting where it should not. Tension, pneumothorax. His fingers started to shake. The space was tight, the ground uneven. Someone outside shouted for a jack. The beam over their heads creaked. For a heartbeat, all he could see was the rise and fall of that broken chest and the bright red fear in the boy's eyes. Then another voice, quiet and clear, cut through the panic in his mind. "Do not look at the blood. Look at the injury. Habit is what saves you." He planted his knees, set his bag within reach. "Okay," he said more to himself than to the boy. "We can do this." His hand found the decompression needle without searching. He cleaned a patch of skin as best he could, counted ribs by touch, felt for the right space. The beam overhead groaned again. Dust sifted down, coating his shoulders. He blocked it out. The world narrowed to the small circle of skin under his fingers, the angle of the needle, the memory of water hissing from a latex glove in a tent, lit by a single lamp. He pushed through. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then air rushed out around the needle with a soft hiss, carried on the smell of trapped breath and fear. The boy sucked in a new breath that filled both sides of his chest. The rattle eased. Color crept back into his lips. Eli exhaled with him. He anchored the needle, secured it as best he could, and shouted for help to lift the beam. Hands appeared. Wood shifted. The space opened enough to slide the boy onto a board. Eli stayed with him, one hand on the boy's shoulder, until they were clear of the broken hallway and out under a sky that had never seemed so open. The boy from the school rode to Harborview Mercy with half the city between him and the broken hallway. Eli sat in the rig with his hand on the edge of the stretcher, watching every rise of the small chest he had freed. In the trauma bay, the team moved in smooth from the hours since the quake. Triage tags hung from wrists and ankles up and down the corridor. The air smelled of sweat-dried dust and antiseptic. Someone took over the airway, someone else checked for fractures. Field decompression to a resident said, seeing the needle taped to the boy's chest. Who did it? Medic on scene. The paramedic answered, already turning away toward another call. The resident leaned in checking position. It is clean, he said, textbook. Dr. Hale stepped in a few minutes later, drawn by the cluster around bed 4. The quake had taken most of the day and blurred it. His shirt sleeves were rolled and there were faint smears on his cuffs. He studied the monitors, the chart the boy's face. Where is he from? Hale asked. Collapsed elementary over on 9th, the nurse replied. They said a military medic rode in with him, then he left with the truck. Hale looked at the neat line of tape around the decompression needle. The skin around it was already losing its dusky shade. Habit saves you, he remembered hearing from someone who had left their building in a helicopter. He stepped back into the hall where stretchers were lined up under portable lamps. A nurse bumped shoulders with him and muttered an apology without looking to see who he was. He did not mind. Outside Harborview, the city counted its broken places and its spared ones. Some buildings leaned now in ways they had not leaned before. Some did not stand at all. In the weeks after the quake, the Grace Protocol shifted from new rule to working reality. The cross-training continued not because of memos, but because no one could handle the weight alone. Surgeons fetched blankets. Nurses backed up decisions and notes so clearly that no administrator could sweep them aside. Aides called out early signs of decline and were heard. The Be Kind mug moved again. Ray carried it to Hale's office one morning and set it on the corner of the desk without explanation. Hale left it there. Sometimes, when he sat late, he found his eyes resting on the chipped rim. The Hall of Excellence came down in stages. Maintenance workers unscrewed frames, stacked them against the wall, and left pale rectangles on the paint where the glass had hung. The wall stayed bare for a while. Eventually, a new board went up. Not marble, just a wide panel of smooth wood near the main entrance. The letters on it were simple. The patient is always a person. See their fear, not their file. Underneath, smaller plaques waited to be filled, each one labeled with acts that might never make a brochure. A double shift covered for a colleague after a death in the family. A fall avoided because someone mopped a spill that was not their job. A crisis averted because a nurse spoke up and a doctor listened. In the lowest corner of the board, so low that children standing in front of it could see it better than most adults, someone had etched the outline of a small black bird. Its wings were spread claws closed around nothing at all. Months passed before Eli Torres found the clinic Grace had chosen. He saw the sign from the passenger seat of a nondescript sedan. Simple lettering, a phone number, nothing more. The windows showed a waiting room with 3 chairs and a ficus plant that did its best with what it had. He stepped out of the car in civilian clothes, jeans, and a plain jacket that did not advertise anything. The air in the suburb felt quieter, as if sirens had to work harder to reach this far. Inside, a woman at the front desk looked up with a practiced smile. He asked for Grace Miller. The woman nodded toward a door at the back. She is finishing up, the woman said. You can wait just there. He sat. The chair creaked under his weight. A child in the corner flipped through a picture book with serious concentration. On the wall, a poster showed a diagram of a heart, its labels slightly faded. The door opened with a soft click. Grace stepped out, closing it gently behind her. She had a chart in her hand, reading glasses in the other. Her hair was pulled back, but a strand had escaped and curled near her temple. For a second, her expression was the one she wore at work, focused and already heading toward the next thing. Then she recognized him, and something eased around her eyes. Eli, she said. Ma'am, he answered, standing, then catching himself. Sorry, force of habit. Habit is not the worst thing, she said. He held a frame in both hands, wrapped in brown paper that had crumpled during the drive. He offered it to her. This is for you, he said. She peeled the paper back. Inside the frame was a photograph printed on glossy stock. A boy sat on a hospital bed in a gown that was too large, grinning with the unguarded joy of someone who had been told they could go home. A thin line of a scar showed near his ribs, where the needle had gone in. His hands rested on a stuffed animal someone had given him. Eli cleared his throat. Collapsed school, he said. You probably saw it on the news. He had a chest full of air and no space for his lungs. There was no surgeon, just me and a beam that did not like staying still. She looked at the picture for a long moment. I heard about the school, she said. I heard your voice, he answered. When it counted. I did what you made me do 10 times in that tent. I did not think. My hands knew. No one died in my care that day. He shifted his weight, a little embarrassed at the way the words sat in the air. He added more quietly, your habit saved him. Grace's eyes stayed on the photograph. When she lifted them, there was a warmth there that had not been there when the helicopter first came for her outside Harborview. Then it was worth the repetition, she said. He laughed softly, the sound releasing some tightness in his shoulders. I wanted you to see him, he said, not as a chart. She nodded, thumb running once along the edge of the frame. Thank you, she said. He stood there for another moment as if trying to find the right way to leave. It turned out to be simple. He gave her a small nod, nothing formal, just an acknowledgement between people who had stood near the same line. If you ever need a pair of hands, he said, you know how to reach command. They will find me. I will remember that, she said. After he left, the front desk grew quiet again. The child in the corner finished the book and set it back on the table. Traffic passed outside in a steady whisper. Grace took the frame into the nearest exam room. On the wall opposite the chair where patients sat, there was a small bare space between two posters. She hung the photograph there, straightening it until the boy's eyes met the room squarely. In her office, tucked behind the exam rooms, the Raven 9 patch was still pinned to the back of the door. Above the small metal filing cabinet on a shelf that held a stack of charts and a jar of pens, the Florence Nightingale medal rested in its case. She had received it in a quiet ceremony months after Lazarus, standing under lights that were too bright for her taste, listening to citations read in a voice that did not know the half of it. When she brought it home, she opened the case, took the medal out, and set it beside the old Global Relief Corps card on her desk. The card edges were more frayed now. The printed photo on it had almost completely faded. She picked up the medal, then the card, then set both down again. For a moment, she simply looked at them. Outside the window, late afternoon sun slid along the street, catching on windshields and leaves. The world beyond the glass did not look extraordinary. A dog walked past with its owner. A delivery truck idled at a light. A kid on a bike wobbled and then found balance again. Grace reached for her mug. The Be Kind letters on this one were not worn away yet. She had bought it after the old one stayed at Harborview. The ceramic was warm against her palm. She took a sip, set the mug down beside the medal and the card, and turned back to the stack of files on her desk. There were charts to update calls to return a patient in the waiting room with a cough that had gone on longer than it should. Work that did not come with rotors or salutes, but that still asked for steady hands and the ability to see past numbers to the person sitting 3 feet away. She stood, smoothed her coat, and opened the door. The small bell at the front desk chimed as someone new walked in. The sound floated down the hall, ordinary and clear. Grace stepped into the light from the corridor, ready for whoever came next. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.